Rain didn't fall that night. It attacked the city, slashing sideways like it wanted to erase everything it touched. Under the crumbling flyover where the world rarely looked and even more rarely cared, a thin girl curled beside her dog, both wrapped in a damp blanket that smelled of smoke and old nights. She had learned to sleep lightly, half in dreams, half in danger. But the sound that tore through the storm wasn't one she could ignore. A choking gasp, a body-dragging breath through something thick. Her dog's head snapped up first, muscles tight, tail low, the kind of alertness he only showed when something was terribly, unnervingly wrong. The girl felt it too, that invisible shift in the air as if the night had inhaled sharply. She stood barefoot against freezing concrete, clutching her dog's fur for courage. The two moved deeper into the underpass, guided only by instinct and fear. And then in the beam of a dying streetlight, she saw them, two police officers collapsed like broken marionettes, their mouths stained with something dark, their bodies twitching in slow, helpless shock. For a heartbeat she couldn't move. A homeless girl, a stray dog, staring at men the whole city feared. But what froze her wasn't who they were. It was the truth in their eyes. They weren't dying from the rain. They were dying from poison, and she was the only person in the world who knew. The night had a way of hiding its cruelty behind the noise of the storm. Rain wasn't simply falling. It hammered everything, drumming against metal sheets, splintered wood, broken concrete, and the hollow spaces beneath the flyover where forgotten souls tried to survive. The sound was relentless, drowning out even the thoughts of those who had learned to live with silence. But the girl, curled beneath a frayed piece of tarp with her dog pressed close against her ribs, wasn't asleep. Nights like these didn't allow sleep. They only allowed waiting, for danger, for cold, for the world to remember she existed just long enough to hurt her again. The dog breathed warm, shaky breaths against her arm, his nose twitching every few seconds like he was reading the storm the way others read books. He always sensed things before she did: danger, hunger, the arrival of strangers. As if some hidden instinct had buried itself deep in his bones ever since the day she found him bleeding behind a dumpster. Tonight, though, his breathing wasn't steady. It was alert, tight. The way he breathed when something was wrong. She tightened the blanket around them, but the wind found every opening, threading icy fingers along her spine. Somewhere above them, trucks roared across the flyover, their headlights flickering through the cracks like ghosts searching for a way inside. Puddles trembled with each passing vehicle. The girl counted the vibrations the way others counted seconds. It made her feel less lost. But then the dog lifted his head. Not slowly, not lazily, suddenly, like a wire snapping, his ears shot forward, wet fur standing up along his back. His tail lowered, but not out of fear, out of readiness, protective, focused. The animal she loved more than anything had become a compass pointing toward danger. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice raw from the cold. The dog didn't look at her. He stared into the deeper darkness of the underpass, where the rain didn't reach and the shadows felt heavier than night itself. Then, from somewhere inside that blackness, a sound slipped into the storm, so faint the girl thought she imagined it at first. A choking gasp, not loud, not clear, but unmistakable, a human in pain. She straightened, cold feet sliding onto the wet ground. The tarp sagged behind her, flapping like a defeated flag. Her breath came out in small, visible bursts. She wasn't the kind of person who went toward sounds like that. She wasn't brave. She wasn't strong. She wasn't anything except a child trying to stay unnoticed. Every adult she had ever met had taught her one thing: don't get involved. Don't draw attention. Don't be seen. But the dog nudged her leg, then moved forward, paused, tapping cautiously over the slick concrete. No, wait, she whispered, reaching out. He didn't. He walked toward the darkness, and she, terrified of losing him more than anything else, followed. The air changed with every step. The storm behind her felt distant now, muffled by the weight of thick pillars and dripping concrete. The smell shifted too, from rainwater to rust, then to something sharper, something that made her throat tighten. Her dog sniffed the ground, then the air, then suddenly growled. A low sound that vibrated against her legs. Another gasp echoed, closer this time. More desperate, more broken. The girl felt fear rise up her throat like bile. Her body wanted to turn around, run back to the tarp, curl up in the dark and pretend she never heard anything. But her feet kept moving, driven by a strange mixture of dread and something she rarely felt: obligation. Maybe because no one had ever helped her. She knew exactly how it felt to need help and find only empty space. A flickering streetlight threw a thin beam into the underpass, weak, shivering, barely alive, but enough to reveal shapes further ahead, two shapes, on the ground. She squinted, wiping rain from her eyelashes. The figures were slumped awkwardly, like their bodies had lost the ability to remember how to hold themselves up. At first she thought they were homeless too. Others like her, people swallowed by the cracks of the city. But then the light caught something metallic. A badge? A belt? A uniform drenched in rain and sweat. Police officers. Her breath froze, every muscle in her body locked. A homeless girl, alone at night, standing over two collapsed cops? She didn't need imagination to see how that could turn into something terrible. Her heart hammered against her ribs so violently it hurt. Her dog growled again, louder this time, pacing beside her with tension coiled through his limbs. She took one step back. Then another. Run, that was the instinct. Before anyone found them. Before someone blamed her. Before the world punished her again for something she had nothing to do with. But then one officer moved. Barely. Weakly, a hand lifted off the ground, trembling, reaching toward her like a drowning man reaching for sunlight. His fingers shook as they stretched toward her, then fell back with a dull slap against the concrete. His mouth opened, releasing a sound that didn't sound human, more like a breath fighting through poison, thick and slow and painful. The girl's stomach dropped. She took a step forward without meaning to. The dog pressed against her thigh, uncertain but trusting her judgment. The officers' faces were gray, their eyes unfocused, sweat beading along their brows despite the freezing cold. These weren't men who had passed out. These were men dying, and she was the only one here. An icy realization slid through her. If she walked away, no one else would find them. The underpass was practically invisible to the world, a forgotten ribcage beneath the city's spine. Sirens never echoed here. Footsteps rarely crossed this path. People avoided the darkness under bridges. If she left, they would be dead before sunrise. Her throat tightened. Why her? Why tonight? Why this storm? This place? This impossible moment? The dog whined, and something inside her chest cracked. It wasn't courage. It wasn't heroism. It was simply the small, fragile part of her that still remembered what it felt like to be human. Slowly, trembling, she knelt beside the officers. Rainwater dripped from the ceiling, tapping against the ground like a ticking clock. Time was running out. She could feel it in their shallow breaths, in the strange sour smell around their mouths, in the dark stain at the corner of one officer's lips. Poison. She didn't know how she knew. Maybe from the way their veins stood out, or from the metallic smell clinging to their breath. But she knew. She lifted her head, eyes searching the darkness behind them. Someone had done this. Someone had poisoned them. And if that someone was still here, her heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the storm. She wasn't just a witness. The officers' breaths came in ragged, uneven pulls, the kind that made the chest rise only halfway before collapsing again, as if the lungs had forgotten what air was supposed to feel like. The girl hovered above them, terrified to move and terrified to stay still. Her fingers hovered in the cold air, trembling, unsure whether touching them would help or condemn her. Every instinct she possessed, every scar that life had carved into her, screamed run, but another instinct rose quietly behind it, the one she rarely listened to. Don't let them die alone. She leaned closer, and the smell struck her harder now. Bitter, chemical, wrong. The kind of smell that didn't come from the street or the rain or the dirt. It came from something man-made, something meant to harm. The dog circled them again, sniffing near the officers' mouths before recoiling with a sharp sneeze. His tail tucked low, his ears pinned back. Fear radiated off him, a fear she had only seen the day she found him injured. He growled softly, the sound rolling in his chest like distant thunder. "It's okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure whom she was trying to convince, him, the officers, or herself. One of the men stirred. His eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes clouded with confusion and pain. They slid unfocused across the shapes around him until they landed on her face. Something in his expression changed. Not suspicion, not fear, recognition. Not of her, but of desperation. He tried to speak, his lips parting, throat working against whatever toxin had gripped him. The girl leaned closer. His voice, when it came, sounded like a rusted hinge. "Help us." 2 words. Words that hit her harder than the cold. Words she wished someone had said to her once in her life. She swallowed, her throat dry, even as rain dripped down her face. I, I don't know what to do, she whispered. His hand twitched, reaching for hers. She flinched, not used to touch, but then forced herself to stay. His fingers curled weakly around her wrist, icy and trembling. He tried again to speak. A warning, a clue, something urgent. But his voice slipped into a garbled whisper she couldn't fully catch. The only word she understood was, run. Her blood turned to ice. Run from what? From who? From them. From whoever poisoned them. She opened her mouth to ask, but his eyes rolled back, and his hand slid away from hers, lifeless for a terrifying moment before he gasped again, sharp and wet. Her breath caught. The panic in her chest flared, squeezing her lungs. She looked around wildly, hoping to see headlights, a passerby, anything. But the underpass was still empty, silent except for the storm. She reached into the pocket of her oversized hoodie, the only safe place she kept anything valuable, and pulled out a small, cracked phone she had found in a trash bin 3 weeks ago. She had never turned it on. She saved the battery for emergencies she prayed would never come. Tonight was the emergency. Her thumb held the power button until the screen glowed faintly. For a moment, hope sparked, but the battery icon flashed red, a hollow warning. 3%, 2%, 1%. A no, please, she whispered, tapping the screen as if begging the battery to stay alive. It shut off. Just like that, the last thin bridge between her and help collapsed. The dog whined, hearing the defeat in her breath. He pressed his forehead against her arm, grounding her. It's okay, she said, voice shaking. We'll think of something. Her teeth chattered, not from cold, but from dread. The rain behind her softened for a moment, the storm catching its breath. In that brief hush, she heard something else. But leaving the officers meant risking their last minutes alone, and leaving her dog meant risking him following her into the road where he could be hit. Fear tugged her in every direction. Then, as if sensing her thoughts, the dog turned and barked once, loud, sharp, determined. Not a warning this time, a call. It echoed through the concrete ribs of the underpass like a flare shot into the sky. The girl hesitated, then followed him toward the mouth of the underpass. Rain slammed into her face as soon as she stepped out. She cupped her hands around her mouth and screamed. Help someone, please. Her voice dissolved into the storm. The highway above swallowed sound like a greedy beast. She tried again, louder, until her throat burned. Her dog barked beside her, adding his voice to hers, over and over, desperate enough that the world should have stopped and listened. Sheila. But nobody did. The city roared on, indifferent. She stumbled back inside, heart pounding painfully. Nobody's coming, she whispered. The dog pressed against her leg as if saying, then we'll do it ourselves. She knelt again beside the officers, forcing herself to examine them the way she'd learned to examine injured animals. Their skin was clammy, sweat mixed with rainwater on their foreheads. One officer's lips had turned blue at the edges. The other's pulse fluttered like a dying moth under her fingertips. She dragged crates and pieces of cardboard nearby, using them to shield the men from the wind. The dog helped without being asked, lying close to one officer's leg to offer warmth, nudging debris toward her with his nose. Minutes crawled like hours. The officer's breathing grew shallower, less certain, as if each inhale asked for permission. At one point, the older officer's eyelids twitched. They opened halfway, and he focused on her with an intensity that startled her. You have to tell them. He rasped every word, scraping his throat. But tell who? She asked, leaning closer. What do I tell? His eyes filled with fear she didn't understand. It wasn't an accident. Her heart stopped. He inhaled sharply, then choked, the sound wet and painful. What wasn't an accident? She pleaded. The poison? Who did this to you? He tried to speak, but the words died on his tongue. His body twitched once violently, then fell still again, his breath a thin whimper of exhaustion. The other officer murmured something too faint to understand. Their consciousness flickered in and out like broken lights. She sat between them, rain dripping from cracks above, her dog leaning against her, their 3 breaths mixing in the cold air, 2 fading, 1 frantic. She didn't know how long they had left. She didn't know if morning would come in time. She didn't know if help would ever arrive. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She couldn't leave them. Not while they still fought for breath. Not while someone out there wanted them silent. Not while she was the only witness to the truth they were dying to say. So she stayed. A homeless girl and her stray dog guarding 2 poisoned men in a storm that felt too large for any of them. And somewhere behind the darkness, something moved. A footstep. Soft. Intentional. watching, as in danger. The soft footsteps she thought she heard drifted back into the darkness, swallowed by the dripping echo of the underpass. For a long moment she didn't move, didn't even breathe, afraid that any shift in her body would draw something closer. Her dog stayed stiff beside her, one paw slightly lifted, muscles tight enough to vibrate. He stared into the shadows with an intensity she had learned never to ignore, but nothing came, nothing moved. Nothing revealed itself. Only the storm continued, pounding the world outside like a warning she didn't know how to read. Minutes dragged by until the fear settled into her bones, forming a quiet paralysis. Her fingers were cold and numb, her knees aching from the concrete. She rubbed her palms together, trying to force warmth back into her hands. The officer still lay beside her, breaths shallow, chest barely rising. She pressed her ear to their chest one at a time, listening for life the way she listened to stray animals she tried to save. Their heartbeats were faint, fluttering, uneven. She didn't know anything about poison, but she knew death. And death was close, too close. The dog nudged her thigh urgently and then looked toward the mouth of the underpass again. She swallowed hard. Maybe that footstep had been real. Maybe someone was still out there, waiting for the officers to die. And maybe for something more. She pulled her arms around herself and tried to think. What am I supposed to do? What can I even do? The city above didn't even know she existed. It wouldn't notice if she died down here. It wouldn't notice if two officers breathed their last breaths at her feet. The world moved on without checking who it left behind. She rocked back on her heels and looked around, hoping desperately for any sign of morning light. But dawn was still hours away. The sky remained black, crushed under thick storm clouds. Then headlights appeared. A sudden beam cut across the wet pavement at the far end of the underpass, bright, white, slicing through the rain like a blade. Her heart leapt. A car. Someone had pulled over. The light flickered, then vanished as the car stopped. A door slammed. The dog barked once, quick and sharp, but she grabbed his collar. She whispered. Another door slammed. Voices rose, muffled by rain, but unmistakable. A man's voice, then another. Laughter, or something close to it, drifting in a way that made her blood run cold. Something in that tone wasn't right. Not casual, not surprised. Familiar, too familiar, too familiar. The dog growled again. She crouched lower, dragging the officers slightly behind one of the concrete pillars. Her hands shook violently as she worked, her breaths coming fast. She didn't know why, but instinct screamed that she needed to hide. The footsteps grew louder. Two men, walking slowly, purposefully. You're sure they crawled in here? One man said, his voice carried by the wind. Where else would they go? The other replied. A storm's too bad to keep moving. And they'd already swallowed the dose. Her entire body froze. These men. They had done this. She pressed a hand to her dog's head, trying to calm him. His entire body shook with the effort of holding in a bark. The girl slid backward, inch by inch, positioning herself in front of the officers even though her shaking legs felt like they might collapse. You think they're dead already? The first man asked. Doesn't matter, the second said. We just need to make sure no one helped them. The girl's lungs closed. No one helped them, meaning her, meaning they'd kill her too. She clamped a hand over her mouth to keep from gasping. The dog's growl deepened, and she pressed her palm against his snout, begging him without words to stay quiet. She could feel his heart racing under his ribs. The footsteps stopped only a few meters away. One man's flashlight beam swept across the floor, illuminating puddles, broken bottles, a pile of old blankets, but not the officers. Not her. Not yet. Let's check deeper in, one man said. Their footsteps receded toward the darkest end of the underpass. The girl didn't move for a full minute, not until rain thundered louder than their steps again. She exhaled shakily. We have to go, she whispered to the dog. He licked her wrist once as if agreeing. She turned to the officers, her heart racing. She couldn't leave them. Not here. Not with those men circling the shadows like wolves. But she couldn't carry them either. They were too heavy, too weak to walk, too close to the edge of death. She grabbed the younger officer by the shoulders and shook him. Wake up. Please wake up. Please. His eyelids fluttered. Barely. She slapped his cheek lightly. The please, nothing. She tried the older officer. They're coming back. Please, get up. I can't move you. I can't. Another flashlight beam swept across the far end of the underpass. She froze. The dog froze. The officers lay motionless beside her. A voice called out closer than before. Did you hear that? The girl's breath hitched. She grabbed the dog's collar, heart pounding so loudly she feared they'd hear it. She crouched low and dragged the officers further behind the pillar, every movement slow and trembling. Her fingers slipped on the wet concrete. Her knees scraped against the ground, leaving thin lines of blood. Her hair stuck to her face, plastered by rain and sweat. She felt the dog shaking beside her, a vibration of terror and readiness mixed together. The voices came closer, too close. Her chest tightened. Tears burned her eyes, but she blinked them back. She couldn't make a sound. She couldn't let herself cry. She couldn't let fear swallow her. Not now. A flashlight beam swept again, closer, brighter, crawling across the debris. It stopped 1 foot away from where she hid. She held her breath so long her lungs screamed. A man's silhouette passed inches from her. She could see the outline of a gun on his hip. She could see the rain dripping from his coat. She could smell the cologne mixing with the metallic scent of poison from the officer's skin. The dog's chest expanded with a silent breath, and she squeezed his collar so tightly her knuckles went white. Then, nothing here, the man said. His footsteps moved on. The girl collapsed slightly, not fully, just enough to feel air return to her lungs. The men walked deeper into the underpass again. She could hear their frustration echoing off the pillars. "We'll check the other side." Their footsteps faded. Voices drifted. Eventually, the car engine started again. She didn't move. Not until she heard the car pull away slowly, its tires hissing against wet asphalt. Only then did she let her shoulders slump forward, forehead touching the cold concrete as she released a breath that shook her entire body. Her dog whimpered softly, pressing his nose into her cheek. "It's okay," she whispered, though her voice cracked on every syllable. "We're okay. For now." But after now was fragile. It was thin. It could break with one wrong move. Morning light didn't arrive gently. It seeped in slowly through the cracks and holes above, turning the darkness into a dull gray. The rain softened into a drizzle. That was when she heard it. Sirens. Real ones. Close ones. She shot to her feet, heart racing. The dog barked sharply, tail raised, voices shouted. Flashlights appeared, official ones. Steps thundered toward her. Within seconds, the underpass flooded with officers, paramedics, and blinding lights. They froze when they saw her. A soaked, trembling girl crouched protectively over 2 poisoned cops, her dog snarling at anyone who stepped closer. For a moment, no one moved. Then one officer shouted. She was with them. Hands lunged forward. Flashlights targeted her face. Voices erupted like waves crashing all at once. She backed away, panicked, clutching her dog, tears burning down her cheeks. "I didn't do anything," she cried. I was helping. But the world had already decided what it wanted to see. A homeless girl, 2 dying cops, a dog guarding her. Suspicious, convenient, too easy a story. Hands grabbed her arms. She screamed. The dog lunged, teeth bared, forcing officers to jump back. Chaos exploded. And for the first time since the night began, she realized something heartbreaking. The thing she had always run from, judgment, blame, danger, had followed her anyway. And now she was trapped inside them. Evening has a strange way of showing a city's 2 faces at once. The glowing face that pretends everything is fine, and the shadowed one that remembers every secret people try to bury. That evening, as the last breath of sunlight melted into a soft bruise of gold and deep blue, something inside Zoya softened as well. The hospital's sterile corridors, the sharp antiseptic scent, the rhythm of beeping monitors, all of it should have felt cold, overwhelming. But instead, there was an unexpected, almost fragile peace hanging in the air, the kind that made her feel seen for the first time in years. Maybe because for once, somebody hadn't walked past her. Someone had stopped. Someone had stayed. Camel sat beside her bed, but today his posture was different. The tension that usually lived in his shoulders seemed a little looser, as though someone had finally lifted a weight he had been carrying far too long. His hand tapped absently on his knee, a habit he probably didn't even realize he had. As if each tap reminded him of a truth he still didn't fully know how to accept. She survived. The officers survived, against every odds stacked against them. Zoya hadn't seen the 2 poisoned officers again, but their faces still flashed through her mind in fragments only trauma could create. The trembling lips, the glazed eyes begging silently for time they didn't have, the hot line of fear running down her arm when one of them clutched her sleeve. And the way her heart had raced as she tried to steady their breathing. Every memory made her body tighten as though it were happening all over again. Her breath would shake, and her fingers would curl around the edge of her blanket. Camel noticed every tremor but didn't ask questions. He didn't push. He stayed quiet in the exact way she needed someone to be quiet. Not distant, not cold, just present. The same way Leo stayed with her on cold nights, leaning his warm fur against her back whenever the world felt too big to survive. Leo, meanwhile, had become something of a celebrity in the hospital corridor. Nurses who first told Camel a 5 minutes only, pets aren't allowed, were now sneaking him bits of boiled chicken and calling him our little hero. Leo accepted the praise like he accepted everything, with serious eyes and a tail that wagged like it was remembering joy in small doses. When someone dropped a tray, he stood alert. When a child cried, he patted over and pressed his head against their leg. Zoya watched him with an aching softness in her chest. She had always known he was special, but seeing the world see it too made her feel for the first time that not everything about her life was wrong. As the evening deepened, Camel placed a warm cup in front of her. Not soup this time. See, real, steaming tea. Her breath caught as she wrapped both hands around the cup, letting the warmth crawl into her palms and settle into her chest. She inhaled deeply, almost reverently, as if she had forgotten scent itself could come from. You know, Camel said quietly, the department spent the entire day talking about you. Zoya blinked, startled. Me? Do, he confirmed with a small smile. That kind of bravery, that kind of instinct. At your age, most adults wouldn't have thought as fast as you did. You saved 2 trained officers. Not many people could say that. A tiny, disbelieving smile curved at her lips, a smile that looked like it had been waiting years for a chance to exist. But then it faded, replaced by a shadow of insecurity she couldn't hide. They're not scared of me? I mean, I live on the streets. Camel's face changed subtly, softening with something protective. Zoya, he said slowly, you're as human as anyone. A home doesn't decide your worth. If anything, you've shown more strength than most people ever will. Her eyes shimmered, and she immediately looked away, trying to blink the emotion back. Camel pretended not to notice, respecting the fragile pride she was trying to hold on to. But he did shift his chair just an inch closer, a small gesture, yet it felt like someone had reached across an entire lifetime to meet her halfway. Outside the window, the city lights were flickering on one by one. A street lamp sputtered twice before settling into a steady glow. In the distance, an ambulance wailed, its siren echoing through the buildings. But for the first time, Zoya felt like all that noise belonged to a world she was no longer fighting alone. The room around her felt like a bubble of safety she had never known, not even in childhood. Camel placed a small paper bag on the table. Your test came back clear, he said. The poison didn't get into your system. You're safe. Zoya let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. A safe, she repeated softly, the word tasting new. There's something else, Camel added, nudging the bag toward her. For you. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a soft gray hoodie, clean, warm, smelling faintly of new cotton and something gentle. She touched the fabric, and her fingers paused, confused by the sensation. Warmth was not a feeling she was used to. You were freezing that night? Camel said. I thought this might help. Her throat tightened instantly. A tear slipped out before she could stop it, and she wiped it away almost angrily. I don't deserve. You deserve more than this, Camel interrupted gently. Much more. When she put the hoodie on, it draped over her like a small protective promise. Leo nuzzled her leg, tail swaying as if telling her he approved. For a moment, she stood straighter, like the cloth itself had added weight to her existence. The right kind of weight. Camel waited a moment before sharing the next part. The department wants you to come tomorrow, he said. The officers woke up. They asked about you first. Zoya froze. They remember me? They're alive because of you, Camel said. People don't forget that. She wrapped her arms around herself, gripping the sleeves, overwhelmed. I'm scared of people, she whispered. People? He asked softly. The way they look at me, she said. Like I don't exist, or like I shouldn't. The Camel shook his head. Tomorrow, no one will look at you like that. I'll be there. Leo will be there. And the men whose lives you saved, they'll look at you with respect. Only respect. Zoya's breath trembled. I'll trying is enough, he said. Evening thickened, turning violet and silver. The city lights outside shimmered like distant promises. And inside, for the first time in years, Zoya felt something she had forgotten existed. Safety. When Camel finally stood to leave, Zoya surprised herself. Camel, she called softly. He paused at the doorway. Yes? Tomorrow, I'll walk with you, she said. I won't run. His smile was small but warm enough to fill the room. Good, he said. Tomorrow changes everything. And as he left, Zoya settled beside Leo, listening to his slow, steady breathing. We won't be alone tomorrow, she whispered into his fur. And for the first time, her words didn't taste like fear. They tasted like hope. The next morning arrived quietly, almost shyly, as if the world understood the weight it carried for Zoya. Dawn light seeped through the hospital blinds in thin golden stripes, landing across Leo's fur, and the blanket tangled around Zoya's legs. She woke slowly, not with the usual jolt of fear or instinctual checking of her surroundings, but with something softer at the edges, a kind of hesitant anticipation that made her heart beat differently. For the first time in a long time, morning didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a beginning. She swung her feet to the floor and stood, the gray hoodie warming her instantly. Leo stretched beside her, paws reaching forward, tail thumping once against the bed. The younger officer reached into a small box and pulled out something she never would have expected. A small silver badge charm engraved with a number. This isn't official, he said with a soft smile. But it's ours, a token, to remind you that you mattered on a night when everything could have been lost. He placed it in her palm, closing her fingers gently around it. The cool metal felt heavy, real, solid, unlike anything she had ever been trusted with. Zoya's breath broke, a quiet sob shaking through her chest before she could stop it. The officers didn't look uncomfortable. They didn't look pitying. They looked grateful. The conversation that followed was slow, warm, and unfamiliar to her. They asked how she'd found them, how she'd known to get help, how she'd stayed brave. She didn't have perfect answers, but they listened to each fragment of her story as though every word mattered. When she mentioned her life on the streets, they didn't look away. When she spoke of nights spent hiding from drunk strangers or storms, their expressions darkened with empathy, not judgment. One of them finally said, No child should live like that, not in our city." And for the first time, Zoya believed it wasn't just sympathy, it was a promise. When they finished talking, the older officer slowly opened his arms. Not a command, an offer. Zoya hesitated, confused, unsure if she was allowed. Camel gave her a small nod. Leo nudged her calf encouragingly. She stepped forward. The officer embraced her carefully, as though she were made of something fragile and precious. Zoya stiffened for a moment. Touch was something she associated with danger, reclaiming space, defending herself. But slowly, she let her weight rest lightly into the warmth of someone who should have been a stranger but wasn't. The younger officer joined, one hand on her shoulder, the gesture gentle and steady. For the first time in her life, Zoya wasn't holding herself up alone. When they pulled away, the older officer said, "If you ever need anything, food, help, a place, you come here, you ask for us." Zoya nodded, breath trembling. As she walked out with Camel and Leo, sunlight spilled through the high windows, turning the floor a soft, glowing gold. Zoya stopped for a moment, letting the warmth touch her face, and something inside her shifted, like a lock quietly opening after years of silence. "Camel?" she said softly. "Yes. How do you think the world could ever be kind to someone like me?" He looked at her for a long moment, then answered with a certainty she didn't expect. "It already is," he said. "You just needed a moment where it could show you." Zoya looked down at Leo, who wagged his tail once as if agreeing with every word. She closed her fingers around the charm in her hand, a small piece of silver, but to her, it felt like the world's first sign she belonged somewhere. And as they stepped into the light, Zoya felt something settle into her bones. Not fear, not survival, but a quiet, steady beginning. The kind that grows when you finally realize the world didn't forget you. It was just waiting for the moment you stepped into the light.